Are you ready? Yeah! I want to know, is everybody ready? Yeah! All right, here we go.
Hinna! Yeah! Yeah! Bobby back! So the difference is doing it. And listen, today we got something a little bit different for all you kiddies out there. We're not gonna have like our normal super speed tutorial buzzing by with a funky beat going on. Instead, I'm wearing my smock sweatshirt today, which I'm sure is older than a couple of you kiddies out there. Because we are going to be cracking into what's in all of these funky dye mixes that I use over here to like make the magic happen on the plastic. Here's the reason why. This is easily the most common question that I get asked from the TDD Army. What is in your mix? You fill in the blank there with whatever you want. So today I'm just gonna hit all of them. Okay, we're gonna hit the whole batch, and then you can fill in the blank with whatever one you need. Here's what we're gonna cover. I'll go over like all the ingredients that are in every one, and for you ratio freaks, I'll hit all the ratios. We'll cover all the ratios, and then like I'll walk you through how I make them. We'll make one together, and I'll show you exactly how it's done. And then we'll cover a little bit of like how I store and keep them, because for some of them it's kind of really important. And then we'll get a little bit into what I use the different dye mixes for, but we're not gonna like dive too far down that rabbit hole, because that's not really what this video is about. And then like last, I have like a bunch of footage and pictures, some other stuff we've done that I think will really help and guide us through it all. Come the end of it, you'll be able to whip up like any of these different concoctions I got over here that we use to funk up plastic with. Okay, but that is more than enough talking about it. Let's get on to doing it. Let's start simple. And first, we'll go over how I transfer the powder dyes that we use, like Pro Chemical and Dye and I Dye Poly here, how we transfer those over from a powder dye into like a usable liquid dye, kind of like how Worm Dip comes liquid ready to go right in the bottle. Now there's basically two main solvents that I use to do that with. The first of those is 100% acetone, you can see that there, and then the other is denatured alcohol, which I kind of repurposed an old acetone bottle and then just wrote it right on there. I don't buy it in these small bottles anymore. I get them in big giant gallon sized cans over at Ace Hardware, and then just transfer them into these for easy use, because both of them are caustic, and they should be handled and kept with care. You can't just put it into any old plastic bottle. There's a chance that it could eat right through it and then cause a big problem. So when I was getting started, I went to Michael's and I bought a bunch of these little 2-ounce glass bottles here to use for it. And then like all you have to do is take the little styrofoam cap seal thingy out of there, because the acetone will eat that right up. It's a science experiment. And then you're good to go. They do also make like chemical safe plastic bottles, sort of like these and these that the Worm Dip come in, that are real easy to find on Amazon. Or you could just repurpose these when you're done with them. I would just suggest using the same color for the same color. However you choose to do it, that's just something you want to do with care, and make sure that the bottle you're using is chemical safe and good to go. For our purposes today, we're going to be doing it in some of these glass bottles, because that's what I have, and they're 2 ounces. That's really easy to scale up from there. All right, first let's throw down a paper plate on the turntable, because this is guaranteed to get messy. And today we're going to be making a little bit of brown. This is brown I Dye Poly here. I use this all the time. I make it in these little single serving cups, but I figured, why not just make a full batch, so I'm good to go. Over here I have my McScooperton. This is a 1/4 teaspoon McScooperton. I use it for all of my scooping needs. In these 2-ounce bottles, ratio freaks, I put in one full, like, I don't want to say heaping, but full 1/4 ounce teaspoon McScoopertons, bang, right into the bottle. Okay, did you see that? And then I cover it up, because this stuff can go everywhere. And then we're going to use acetone in this. Oh, this is right to the top. I'm going to have to do this carefully. And then, about 2 ounces. Yep, of acetone. And then put the cap on, make sure it's snug, and then you shake the crap out of it. And probably you can shake the crap out of it for a good long while. Even still, all of the particulate is not going to seem, or really not going to, dissolve fully into the acetone. Right? This is one area where I definitely like the Pro Chemical and Dye over the iDye Poly, because it just seems to be cut, the powder seems to be cut so much finer, which allows it to dissolve and to spread, you know, fuller through. You know what I'm trying to say, okay? So you just keep shaking, and then eventually you've shaken it enough, and you just deal with a little bit of the particulate. Now, that sentence right there, you just deal with a little bit of the particulate. That's a reason why, like when I have the color that I need in Worm Dip, like this red here, I go to it first to see if it's, you know, gonna work for me, because I don't have to deal with the inevitable particulate that comes from mixing powdered dye into liquid dye. But that's how we do it right there. Once it's mixed, you are set to jet for like almost any dyeing technique out there. The most common used is probably for brushwork and spin dyeing, like you can see going on the screen right there. That's kind of where one of the dividing lines between acetone and denatured alcohol comes into play. Like a lot of people prefer to use denatured alcohol in their mix for spin dyeing and brushwork, because it's a little softer on the disc and not so rough on the plastic. But I use dyes like this in their liquid form, whether it be a mix like that or the Worm Dip, in all sorts of different beds, like this lotion bed that you can see me doing here. That's from one of our live streams on making flame rings, if you want to check that out. But there's how the disc came out in the end. But it's not just lotion beds, I use it all the time in clear glue and white glue beds. You can see all that going on. So it's super versatile. It can be used for tons of different dyeing techniques once you got it all mixed up. Just make sure that you're keeping it in a safe way. And that really about covers almost our turning powdered dye into liquid dye. There's kind of like a little subsection. We're going to go over my hot dip mix next, but that requires a little bit of setup and breakdown here. So why don't we flip it so you guys can skip it. While I guess it still could be considered turning powdered dye over into liquid dye, I felt like hot dips were different enough to earn their very own special little section. What I primarily use hot dips for is dyeing the black of all the stencils that I do, and I do it in this old skillet that you see right here. So that's the formula that we're going to go over together today, but really it works with any other color for loads of different applications. So if you need to transfer it over, that should be easy. This batch in here that you can see now, I mean, I originally made this well over a year ago now, and I basically have just been nursing with more dye or more water as needed as time has rolled on. And you know, I bring that up to say that like these ratios aren't rules, okay? Think of them as like a jumping off or a starting point, but I've strayed way off of the original formula that you know once went into this skillet when I first got started. But for today, like I said, we'll go over the black hot dip mix and how I originally made it the very first time. The ingredient list for this magic formula is pretty short. All you need is one full pack of iDye Poly Black, which if you're using Pro Chemical and Dye instead, I would recommend using Dungeon Dark or Onyx instead of Cool Black. They just seem to be much darker. And if you're a real stickler for the ratios, this is 0.5 ounces or 14 grams of iDye Poly if you're trying to compare that. And then in my mix, I put in 1/4 teaspoon McScooperton of brown iDye Poly. This isn't totally necessary. This is an old army shoe shine trick that seems to make black look a little bit blacker, so I do it. And then 6 to 8 cups of water, and if you want, you can add one of these large mason jars to the list as well. They're great for storing and mixing it up in. Okay, I'm not going to boil up any water out here on the camper today, so you're just going to have to settle for some of these clips running as I talk about it. But look, it's super easy. There's nothing to it. Here's all you got to do. First, take your 6 to 8 cups of water and bring them to like an almost boil. Not boiling though, okay? You want to get the water hot first though before you add the dye, because the dye powder dissolves and mixes through the hot water way better than it does the cold water. Okay, so once you got the water at the almost boil, then take it and pour it into either the mixing cup like in the video or into one of your mason jars, and then pour the dye in. That's the whole thing. Like if you're doing the black, like I said, just pour the whole black thing in, and then your 1/4 teaspoon scoop of the brown. And then like this is one spot where the mason jar is a little nicer than the mixing cup, because you can put the lid on and just shake the crap out of it, which seems to spread it through a little bit better than just stirring it. But once it's all mixed up, boom, you're ready. And then from there, like I said, that original one that I made just went right into this skillet, and I've been nursing it ever since. It works great with the lid on for storage. I've never had it spill anywhere or make a mess, but what makes it really clutch is being able to dial in on whatever temperature I want and to have that kind of control. So, you know, I dial it up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit. As soon as it's ready, I drop the disc in there, bang, set to go. Now, what you've been watching in most of the video clips that have been playing up here is how I handle other colors, right? After I got the hot dip mix ready, I'll take a big pot of water and I'll bring that water to a boil, and then I'll set a big frisbee on top and pour the hot dip mix right in there, and then float the disc inside the big frisbee to do the hot dip for that, you know, random color. And then once it's all done, I'll take the hot dip from the frisbee, pour it right back into the mason jar, screw the top on, store it for the next time I'm going to do one of those colors. We kind of rolled right into and through uses there, I guess, for the hot dip mix, which is sort of self-explanatory in the name, if nothing else. But right there is a picture of the disc that I was working on in most of those video clips that we were watching. That whole entire disc was done with just 2 hot dips. One to do the black for the stencil, and then another purple one to do every other square there. You know, you can do some really cool stuff with hot dips, and there's a whole bunch of different applications. But with that op art picture there, we have tied a pretty little bow on the hot dip and the powdered into liquid dye section of the program. Let's move on to the one that I get the most questions about, the lotion mix. Okay, the lotion mix. This one has taken me a long time to hone in on and get right, which, you know, if I'm honest with you, I'm still tweaking it here and there as I go. But it is easily one of my favorites to use because of all of the killer designs that you can make with it, and like it leaves your discs just smelling lovely when you're done with them. But you know, for like the longest time, I had like a real hard time getting good color saturation out of my lotion mix. All of that changed when I switched over and started using Pro Chemical and Dye in there instead of iDye Poly, which I think there's a couple reasons why. First, it's just better, okay? It's just better. Second, you know, like I said earlier, like it's just cut so baby powder fine, and that helps it like mix and distribute so much more evenly through the lotion when you're mixing it all up, which makes a big difference in the end. Okay, so let's mix some up together and I'll show you everything that's in it. So I pretty much always use these 2 types of mix squirted in bottles here for my lotion mix. Big tip, little tip really is all that matters. These little tip mix squirted in bottles are amazing. I don't ever mix the lotion up in these though. It's always in the 4-ounce one and then squirted into that one. But let's fill one up and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, down goes the paper plate. Off comes the lid. Now today we're going to be making some bright yellow. That's probably one of the most commonly used colors that I mess with when it comes time for the lotion action. And first thing that goes into the bottle is the powdered dye. When you're using the Pro Chemical and Dye, I use 1/2 teaspoon of the Pro Chemical and Dye, which is 2 scoops of this. Okay, now getting it in there can be tricky if you don't use a funnel. You gotta be real careful. Bang, every grain. 1 more scoop. Boom, 1/2 teaspoon of powdered dye has gone in. Okay, and then the next thing is we're going to do just a little splash of acetone. Now, the way that I can try, I don't pour it from the bottle. I can't control that very well. So I'll pour some into the cap. Even that look like I got too much in there. I'll just pour a little bit back in. And then from the cap into here. Now, we just want enough really to wet the powdered dye down there and to swoosh it around so it starts to dissolve in the solvent a little bit. And what that's going to do is help it mix through the lotion a little bit better, which is what's going in next. And we kind of got to act quick here because this is not one of those bottles that is super acetone friendly, one of those plastics. So next goes into the bottle is Queen Helene's cocoa butter, 4 ounces of Queen Helene's cocoa butter. Now, I've tried a bunch of different lotions, okay? Cocoa butter has worked the best, no question about it. And Queen Helene's is the king of the cocoa butters. I gotta do this with a little bit more control. I'm nervous I'm gonna squirt it all. Oh, look at that. Yeah, the Queen Helene's, it just seems to always be like just the right consistency for both like pouring and mixing. Okay, and then once you got it in there, you don't want to fill it like all the way up to the top. You want to leave some space in there, some room for air, so that when when you mix it up, which is what we're going to do next, there's some room for it all to move around. Now, if you want, at this point, you can stick like a little marble or something in there. That helps to kind of agitate and stir it all around as well. But everybody's familiar with this next step. We've done it already. Now you shake the thing up like it owes you money, okay? And like you got to shake it for a little while because like the powdered dye, like the better that it mixes through the lotion, the better the dye mix is going to work. So, you know, shake that thing like a Polaroid for a while, and then when that arm gets tired, switch it over to this arm. Shake it up over there for a while. And then, you know, once it's all mixed up and you've satisfied whatever level of OCD that you operate under, then you're pretty much set to jet and it's ready to go. I'm going to keep shaking it while we talk here, maybe just because the sound is funny. But, you know, I want it to be mixed for when I use it next time. Okay, that's good. That's good enough for now. Okay, worth mentioning is like before you use it, you probably want to just like squirt a little bit out before you get going, because there's always just like a little bit in the tip that gets trapped up in there that doesn't get fully mixed. So if you just give it a little squirt to get started, now like you're set to go. And you know, I use this lotion mix mainly for 2 different things. Okay, I use it in all sorts of different types of dye beds and as a topper. I mostly made that word up to color in stencils right on top of the disc. But like once I honed in on this mix that transferred well to the disc, like I went lotion bed crazy for a while. And there are so many different cool designs, like I was saying earlier, that you can make with it that are scrolling by over my super high-tech microphone here, like blossoms and bursts and ribbons and lazy wavies and flame rings and, you know, flames all up and down the disc. There are just so many cool designs that you can crank out with it. I've used this same lotion mix like in clear glue beds, on top of clear glue beds. You can see in the picture there, it like spreads out different, but like it still transfers popping colors over to the disc. What I'm trying to say is like the number of designs and different things that you can do with this is really only limited by your imagination, nothing else. And like I mentioned, it works great as a topper as well. You can sponge or swab or paint or squirt it right onto the disc to make all sorts of different gradients and textures. You just got to let it sit on there for a while. The key is making sure that it doesn't dry out, because once it gets dry, then it's not transferring dye to the disc. This is probably a good spot for us to transition ourselves over to the next, which is the laundry detergent mix, which really is a fantastic topper in itself. The laundry detergent mix is a relatively newer, mix and method added to the repertoire pretty recently. It was first introduced and brought onto the TDD airwaves by the lovely Miss Kateri of This Is How I Die in one of our other basement disc dyer episodes not too long ago. It's like super simple and straightforward, but it works fantastically as a topper, like I said. So let's mix up a batch together and get this thing going. I like using these little 4-ounce mason jars to mix and store my laundry detergent mix in. This is Sonic Blue right here. You know, I don't like squirt it too much, so there's no real need for a bottle. If I did, I would, you know, I can use a pipette or a syringe, I guess, if need be. I got an empty one here for us to mix some up in together, so let's crack into it, get this party started. We'll use the same Pro Chemical and Dye Bright Yellow that we did the lotion mix with. And just like the lotion mix, I got my McScooperton here. I'm going to do 2 of them, which is 1/2 teaspoon of the powdered dye. Bang, both of those go in there first, and then cap her back off. And then also, just like the lotion mix, that's denatured alcohol. We're gonna take a little bit of our acetone and splash it in there just to wet it down and help it mix up a little bit. And again, I poured too much into the cap. Perfect. Okay. And then we'll swoosh that around. Next, in goes the laundry detergent. Now, I use Tide laundry detergent. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Don't use the cheap stuff, okay? It's too runny. And then when you try to use it on the disc, it just like runs down the disc and doesn't stay where you put it, which sucks. Okay, so like I said, I use Tide. Now, this Tide is like kind of blue. Don't worry about that, all right? The color of the detergent is not going to affect how like the color of the dye mix transfers over to the disc. All right, now again, we're going to use the pour it into the cap method first. Into the mason jar goes 4 ounces of the high-end laundry detergent. And then we'll put the cap back on this sucker, screw it on nice and tight, and then, I don't know if this is your favorite part yet, but I know you know what's coming next. Shake that bad boy up real good, and then when you think you're done, shake it a little more, okay? It's not gonna hurt. You can handle it. Give it a really, really good shake. That's a really good shake. I pretty much exclusively use this laundry detergent mix as a topper, like I mentioned. Here's some of the things I like about it versus the lotion mix as a topper. First, like I feel like I get much like more consistent and cleaner fills out of it when that's like the look that I'm trying to go for. Sometimes with the lotion mix, like the fill areas can be like a little bit patchy and all the coloring or shading won't be quite as consistent. It's also much easier to control and to use with a paintbrush, which allows me to do like smaller and little detailed areas easier with it. And then last, it takes way longer for it to dry out while sitting on top of the disc. So I know that dye is still transferring, like we mentioned previously, which, you know, that allows you to do things like heat it up or even let it sit overnight to get a much deeper or richer shade out of the color. And it's great for doing textures too. You can see in this clip here how I'm using it with a sponge, layering up several coatings of that green for the grassy area there on that evil mushroom disc. Like, this has quickly become one of my #1 favorite mixes in my disc dyeing toolbox, and I use it all the time now. All right, we are rounding turn 4, and we only have one more to cover. All that's left on the list is the Floetrol mix. Okay, the Floetrol mix. This is another one that I basically exclusively have one use for, and that is making awesome dye beds out of it. I'm sure that if you're here watching me now, that you've seen some of the other videos out there on YouTube with artists doing like acrylic pouring painting methods and all of just like the mind-blowing designs that they are getting with it. Like the thing that it's most commonly used for is making all of those righteous cell designs. So like that's pretty much what I use the Floetrol mix for is chasing like similar designs that you see in all of those acrylic painting videos. Now, I've seen several different variations of this specific mixture and concoction from other dyers that has yielded and brought them really good results. But I'm just going to cover with you what I've honed in on and found success with myself. This is the only of the dyeing mixes we've gone over that I don't store and keep for use later on. I make and use everything that I need all in one single session. And I mix each of the colors up in your standard solo cup here, and when it's all mixed up and ready to go and it comes time to do all the funky pouring stuff, you can just pour it right out of the solo cup if that's how you want to do it. But they also make like a bunch of specialty made really cool different types of pouring cups or pouring devices, and you can make them yourself after you just look at a couple of them. But you know, you can pour it right over top of it and it breaks it down in different directions. There's all sorts of these types of things that you can get out there. But when it comes time to mix it up, like I said, your standard solo cup is what I'm using to get it going. This is where we're going to break away from the pattern that we've been following the whole time. I am not going to put the dye in first and then the splash of acetone, because I don't trust this plastic in the solo cup to not melt and for it to all just drop right out the bottom. So the first thing that we're going to put in is the Floetrol, okay? And for all of you ratio sticklers, you know, when I make this, I usually do like 8 ounces into about 8 ounces into the Floetrol cup, okay? So that's the first thing that we're going to do. Dump that white goo right up to about that line there. And then the next thing we're going to put in is the powdered dye. Now, for 8 ounces of Floetrol, I use somewhere between a teaspoon to a teaspoon and a half of the powdered dye, which for our purposes means 5 scoops with the mixed scooperton. And I'm kind of, instead of trying to like, I don't want to like pile it all up into one little pile. I'm sort of trying to spread it out because it dissolves and mixes through a little bit better that way. That was 3 scoops, 4 scoops, 5 scoops. Cap back on. Okay, now we're going to give it a little splash of acetone on top, because with all that Floetrol in there, we should be safe that it's not going to mess with the plastic. But we don't want to just like leave it sitting there on top by itself for too long, because you know it'll get right at the plastic on top. So grab something and then start mixing. And just like with the lotion mix and the other ones we went over, the better and more evenly you mix the dye through the Floetrol, the better the mix is going to work, okay? Now, I'm not going to use this to make a bet. I'm just doing this for the purposes of this video. But still, nonetheless, I'm going to mix it up real good. Here we go. Okay, calling that real good. Okay, now at this point, like really, you're good to go for most of like all the crazy different pouring designs that you see when you're scanning the YouTubeverse. But if you want to crank this up to the mix that makes all of the funky cell designs, that's where you got to add one more ingredient, and that is some silicone oil. I have this silicone pouring oil here. I'm going to carefully take the cap off. Oh, nope, we're not going to do it that way. Carefully take that cap off. And then you don't need much of this, okay? Like I'm going to say 4 or 5 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now that it's in there, like if you want, you can mix it up really good again, but the more you mix it now, once the silicone's in, the more it's going to break up and the smaller your little cell bubbles are going to be. The less you mix it up, and you want to mix it up some lightly, then like the bigger and maybe even more varied that your cell bubbles are going to be. Okay, so now that it's in there, I'm going to like do this, instead of stirring in big circles, I'm doing like bottom to the top type mixing, top to the bottom type mixing. And then a couple of these, and then boom. Okay, you can see that was like way different than the last mixing method. And now this Floetrol mix is ready to do all those funky cells. Now, like normally what I would do at this point is I got my yellow here, and then I would mix up like 2, maybe 3 more colors, like blue and red, and then I'd have all the primaries. And then you can put them into the pouring cups and pour them all together, or you can like put one of these down and then pour them into that, and then do like the slide technique. Or you could just take like the yellow and pour some, and then the blue and pour some, and then the red, and then kind of stir it around. Like there's all sorts of ways that you can make, you know, cell designs or just funky monkey Floetrol designs with this mix, now that it's all kind of stirred up and ready to go. And with that kind of stirring of the silicone into our Floetrol mix, we have finished up the last of the concoctions that I use to funk plastic up with every day out here on the camper. Like the only thing that's left from here is mixing some of it up for yourself. Like go get the bits and pieces and the pouring cups and the solo cups and the squirter tins and mix some of these good. Like here's the whole thing. This is all you got to do. Put it in the cup and stir. It's the whole thing. And before you know it, you're going to be funking up some plastic too. All right, kiddies. I hope that you had a really good time and that you learned something new along the way. We'll be back again before you know it. Until then, you better keep doing it.
Oh.
Heartbreaker!